776 feet in height, it's Ventriloquism Weekly. Welcome back on this Monday, President's Day, February 17th, 2014. I hope you all enjoyed last week's live on tape episode with Jay Johnson. Jay is as kind a man as he is talented, and it was fun to be around him, Steve Axtell, John Hardman, and a host of other greats last month. In fact, the gentleman we have here today is someone I've always admired and quite enjoyed hanging around him at CAX. John Kimmons, a.k.a. Kimmo, is our very first guest from across the pond. Not only is he our first guest from another continent, it was a pleasure to be able to conduct our interview in person at CAX. Kimmo won the title of Children's Entertainer World Champion at the Blackpool Opera House in 2008. He also won the Ken Dodd Award for Comedy, becoming the first children's entertainer to do so. To hear about those awards, how Kimmo came to ventriloquism, and so much more, here's our interview with John Kimmons. From all the way across the pond, Kimmo, John Kimmons, how are you today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let me just check our levels here for just a second. And the gain, okay, I'll just get closer. So, what, your journey in ventriloquism, as I was researching you, is very unique. You came to it through magic,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. So, you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was a magician and a Punch and Judy man for many, many years. The late Edwin Hooper from Supreme Magic got me into Punch and Judy, and Punch in my area developed quite a poor reputation. There was a guy going around doing a really violent show with unsuitable material for children. It made the papers, it made the national papers, and I was singled out for some reason, even though it wasn't my show that people had complained about. And so I decided, I thought I'll drop this and I'll do ventriloquism. I saw a rabbit puppet on sale at the Blackpool Magic Convention, and I just fell in love with this character. It was called an animal crackers rabbit. The body was paper thin, with a big head, big mouth movement. It was a great looking puppet. Again, it was a Supreme prop, and so I bought this and practiced it. My wife thought it was hilarious. It was my ex-wife, my wife at the time, thought this was hilarious. She said, it's fantastic, this should go straight in the show. And I took it to the show, pulled it out, and froze, and could not even get one line out. I was terrified and found it embarrassing, the idea of talking to myself. What I always say, you know, what you're comfortable doing in the privacy of your own bedroom, you're slightly more embarrassed about doing it in front of an audience. And so I just couldn't do it. I came home, slung this thing to the back of the garage, said, this is never coming out again, and forgot about it. And forgot to tell my ex-wife that I decided not to do it anymore. And then I came home, and it might have been 3-4 weeks later, and said, and she came up and said to me, well, I've taken you a show, but the lady doesn't like Punch and Judy. She wants to do the ventriloquism, so I've booked in a ventriloquism show. She's not keen on magic. Her son loves puppets. She wants mainly ventriloquism. So, and I said, I've not been doing it. You know, rather than call it was almost like a sitcom, because rather than call the woman and say, look, we've made a mistake, I don't do this, I decided to go with it. So I went into the garage to get the puppet out, and the mice had been at it. It was wrecked. I rang up Supreme. It was at the end of the Supreme's lifespan, really.
Oh, no.
And they hadn't got any more in stock. I said, what have you got? They said, we've got a tiger. I said, send me the tiger. And it arrived on the day of the show. So on the day of the show was the day I got my puppet. And
had you been writing the routine beforehand?
I still had the routine from before. It wasn't a great one. It was a lot of stock lines, floating up with the balloon bit, that kind of thing. And the puppet became Tony Tiger. I got through it and didn't like it very much, but it was enough to keep me going. And then suddenly, there's this point in ventriloquism where the character kind of comes to life, and suddenly you realise you're not even thinking about it anymore. And the character almost takes over, and it's a weird thing. And that kind of happened. And then suddenly you can relax when the puppet comes out because he takes over and takes some of the weight off you. And it's a really weird thing. And I would urge anybody to get to that stage and to work through the early stages when you feel embarrassed about bringing it out, because there's this one show where the puppet comes out and it will suddenly come out with a line that you wouldn't have thought of. And it sounds really weird, but the puppet kind of thinks for itself, starts coming out with lines. And it takes a while for me to get to that stage. Even now, when I put a new puppet in, I'm back to that stage one again.
There's people tend to feel when they get a new character or when the routine starts to get old, they feel like they need to just jump in. They don't realize how much time it does take.
Yeah, I put Jambo the gorilla in the show when I saw it, and I worked out the movement I wanted to do for him, and it took a year before I felt comfortable with that character. And I've usually worn the puppet out by the time I feel comfortable, and I have to order a new one in then.
Yeah, you had said you had something like 16 Charlies.
16 Charlies, 16 Axtell Willie the Kids,
Yes.
Which is the current Charlie. Before that, it was a fabric puppet, and I had a few of those, but a guy in our area bought the same puppet and was using that. And of course I started with Tony Tiger, but then I couldn't get a replacement Tiger because the company had gone bust at that point. Supreme Magic was no more. So I asked a local sewing lady if she could make me one. What came back was not a tiger, it had spots. She got some first. She said, "Oh, I've got some tiger fabric." And when it came back, it had spots.
It was a cheetah.
So it was Charlie
something.
Cheetah. So
Yeah.
that's where Charlie came from. He was Charlie Cheetah, and then Charlie Cheetah became a little boy called Charlie, and it's the same voice, and elements of the routine are still there, because I stick to what I know.
It's fine. Now, being from across the pond, what are some differences in the UK humor and American humor, and why does it work across the pond coming to these conventions and coming to the States?
I don't find there's much difference at all, because there's this big myth in the UK, and there may be similar myths about the British sense of humour. There's a big myth in the UK that Americans don't get irony, but of course Americans get irony, and of course it's exactly the same. It's the same with children. Children are the same everywhere. There are references. I think maybe people come over and they don't do their research and they don't know what the references are. I came over and was the first time and was making references to Claims Direct, which is an insurance firm which doesn't exist. So I've changed it to Geico when I come over here. So it's just a bit of research. You have to know there's certain words. I remember Jimmy Carlo coming over to the Kidabra convention and telling the children to press his hooters, which is a horn, which is like a bicycle horn. And he's saying, "Can you press my hooters?" and it means a different thing over here.
Yes.
So it's just a case of learning the references. So it's just really cultural references that are different. TV shows you may not get, and a lot of American comics do tend to come over and assume that the English people will get the references. But we don't. We don't get the Tonight Show. We don't know who Johnny Carson is in the UK. Most people don't even know who he is. So some of the most famous, a lot of people don't know who David Letterman is or Jimmy Fallon. Never heard of these people. And it's the same when we come over. If we're making references to things that we think are everyday objects and people will know, they don't. So I usually ring up Mike Bent, Ken Scott. These are my guys who I ring up and I say, or I get in touch through Skype and say, will this work? Will this work? Mm-hmm. I've got some great lines that I can't do over here because they won't be funny because you don't know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm.
But you still killed. You killed on your lecture, and as it's Saturday afternoon right now, and I make the prediction you're absolutely going to kill tonight. So that comedy really does comedy transcends.
Yeah, it's universal. It's absolutely universal. As in visual comedy, you can go and watch a silent comic from anywhere in the world, and it's funny. People laugh at the same things. The only thing that doesn't translate is cultural references. So if you, that's my tip to anybody trying to work overseas. Just check out your references. Check out whether people will get them, and then that's it. The humour's the same. People get irony. They get sarcasm. They understand everything. People say Germans have no sense of humour. And it's really funny. That's interesting because there's a comic in England called Stuart Lee who's done some research into this. And the reason why people think Germans don't have any sense of humour is because jokes don't translate into German very well because of the way the sentence structure works. So you have to give the place where something occurs before you tell the joke, and very often jokes, the payoff is where the thing is, and you've already killed the punchline before you've told the joke. So translating into different but we speak the same language. There's no kind of translation problems here.
Just the accent, and a little secret about Americans: we love the British accent. We really do.
And it's the same the other way around. We think everything's sophisticated that comes from America.
That's great. So we had Neil Bacon on the show. He's from Canada.
I know Neil, yeah.
Yes, we had him on a couple months ago, and he talked about children's entertainment and the type of show that that gets put on in Canada and the sort of culture. How is children's shows, how are they received in the UK versus in America? Respect for performers and respect for the type of show.
I've always considered myself to work in the American style, because the entertainers that really impressed me in my formative years were people like David Ginn, who I was watching using music way back before anybody used it. He had backdrops, music, and he was working in a kind of funky style, and I like that kind of thing. And I think America have a great system, and I used to say, don't let our full party system bleed over into the States, because in England, entertainers tend to handle the whole party, which means very often it's an obstacle to overcome. People see you as a babysitter because you're coming in and you've got to do the whole thing. Now there's people like Silly Scott and my wife Tamar who get round this really well, and they've taught me it doesn't have to be like that. That was the way I perceived it. That's really the main difference. American performers tend to come in, do their show, do 45 minutes, and they are a magician. Whereas in England, they tend to be more of a rounded, and I'm not one of these, because I just go in and do a show generally, but they tend to be more of an all-round package. They come in and they are party organisers, they handle the giveaways, and they do the games with the children as well, and they pretty much host the entire party. And but I think the fact that children's entertainers aren't respected by certain people is the fault of children's entertainers. There's a lot of entertainers in England at the moment. I don't know what the situation is in the States, who are competing and to get the lowest price, really.
Yeah.
I had Wilfred Tyler, who wrote Open Sesame, do my birthday party. And I know he charged £45 for a 45-minute show when I was 6 years old, and there's people going out for that now. so which is, and this is what's bringing down the respect. I think really, Mike said it today in his lecture. Price yourself at a rate that commands respect.
Yes, and you are very well respected, and you, like we said, you came to ventriloquism a little later in your career development, and then you won all these awards for your act. What was that like to go to add this new thing, and then all of a sudden it click, and to just be so recognized?
That was the funny thing. I didn't ever want to do the Blackpool competition.
Yes.
And I remember Jolly Roger telling me that he was doing it, and this year it was going to be the World Championships. And I still put up my publicity. I'm the reigning world champion, because they've never called it that since. They've held the competition many times. There's been many other winners, but they've never called any of them world champions. So I'm the reigning world champion until they decide to do it again. But it was a strange thing. I got called by Derek Lever from Blackpool I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks before the competition. I think somebody may have dropped out and asked to do it. I was a nobody. Nobody knew who I was. I'd developed on my own for like 19 years, I think, without any contact with other magicians. And I didn't know what to do, so I took everything. I decided on what I was doing on the day. And I was so nervous, it was a case of, I'll bring Charlie out and he'll take over. And he does. He just takes over. Yes. And he worked the crowd really well. It went, and I won the comedy award at the convention, which I didn't think kids entertainers were up for. So that was the big surprise.
Yes.
I had no idea I was even eligible for that, because it was the first time one's won it since, but it was the first time a kids entertainer had ever won that award. So that was the real. I treasure that more than the kids competition award, because that was just competing against 5 other guys. This was against everybody at the convention, being told I was the funniest act there.
And doing both magic and ventriloquism, what in your mind, there are conventions for ventriloquists. There are conventions for magicians. Being here at CAX, this is a convention for entertainers, family entertainers. In your mind, what makes a good entertainer?
It's connection with the audience. And we've heard this time and time again from nearly every lecturer who's been here this weekend. It's all about you and the audience and how you connect and how you relate to the audience. It's nothing to do with what puppets you've got. It's nothing to do with the props you have or whether you've got the latest effects. It's all to do with the audience liking you and wanting to come with you on your little journey. I mean, I always say I don't try and get inside the audience's heads. I try and take them on a journey into mine. I turn up to the show with some cool stuff and say, look, I think this is cool, and come with me and see what I think's interesting. And so I think that's the best thing you can do. And it's just a case of you and your audience going on a little journey together, I think. And Danny Hustle from Boston told me a great thing, and I don't know if it's something he came up with, but he said the easiest way to get an audience to like you is to let them know that you like them. And if they think that you're interested in them and you like them, then they'll like you and they'll go anywhere with you. So I think that's an important point of advice.
A very good message. And the last question I always end on: what do you want to see from the next generation of ventriloquists, of entertainers coming up in the UK, in America? Do you want to see more crossover? What do you look for in the people coming up?
Do you know what I think distinguishes the real top entertainers is they're all one-offs. So I suppose the answer is I don't even know what I want to see. I want to see something where I sit down and think, wow, I'd never have thought of that. I can't even imagine. I mean, and there are people who would do that. There's the guy called Magic George, and he was mentioned today actually by Annie Banani, Magic George in the UK, who does, I don't think he does vent, I think he has done in the past, but he does a silent act with a puppet, the funniest thing I've ever seen. And it's people who come up with these off-the-wall ideas where you think, wow, I'd never think of that. Buster Balloon comes up with some stuff that
That blew me away last night. Were you at the Mike Bent lecture with the?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
the
miss
balloon
it.
pack and everything.
Yeah. Some of these guys come up with some amazing things. And so I think what I'm always looking for is something that I sit down and think, wow, I'd never have thought of that, because that entertains me. It's if it's something predictable. And I think that's why it's important, again, to when you're planning a children's show, not to worry too much about what you think the kids will like, but to think, what do I think's really cool, and what would I like to show the kids, as long as it's appropriate. But what would I like to show the kids, and make the show more about you, and then the kids will connect with you and go with you.
Wonderful. Well, Kimmo, John Kimmons, thank you so much for being with us on Ventriloquism Week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks again to John Kimmons for taking time out of his busy schedule at CAX to come on the program. Now, just a quick note about the cropped photo guessing game that was going on our Facebook group. And if you're not there, you should go over there, Ventriloquism Weekly -podcast for ventriloquists. It's officially over. I have decided that I will announce the guest teased in our fun game tomorrow. I had said I was going to do it Thursday, but tomorrow is a very special day for this returning guest, and he will be with us early next month. So stay tuned to find out exactly who it is tomorrow. And next week, speaking of returning guests, next week is super special. We haven't quite recorded the interview yet, and I've talked to him leading up, wanting to do the interview, and I'm just so excited to get him on the phone again. Our first ever guest returns to Ventriloquism Weekly. Next week, Vinny Ewert, one of Long Island's best entertainers, will be here to talk about his show, Those Voices in My Head, a benefit project for Wounded Warrior Project. I can't wait to talk to him again for the program. It's just going to be great. I'm so excited. And on a personal note, before we get out of here this week, I have started to host a show for my college's internet radio station, WPUB. Now, I know you guys are here for the interviews with the ventriloquists, but if you ever want to hear me just play the music I like and interview different people from my college, you can go to WPUB.org and listen to The Matt Bailey Show. I'm very excited, and I thank you, because I don't know if I would have chased this avenue down if I hadn't been doing this podcast, and you guys have been listening. So thank you. We move on, we move up, and I'm still going to do VW, obviously, but this is a new fun project for me, and it all stems from this little podcast. So go ahead and take a look at that. And that's it for us today. Remember to find us in all your standard places: Facebook at Ventriloquism Weekly podcast for ventriloquists. And as always, your suggestions are welcome at ventriloquismweekly at gmail.com. Signing off for Ventriloquism Weekly, I'm Matt Bailey, reminding all you vents out there to keep talking for two.